Hi and welcome to a tutorial on exterior car modelling. Now what we're going to do is focus on the bodywork of a car and use a 3D scan that's been taken of a Volkswagen Polo. Now with the scan which we've got, we're going to want to try and use the actual surface as a reference in order to use the freeform modelling tools inside of 3dsmax. Now I'm changing some of the settings just so that we can see what's happening to the actual plane that we're allocating, and we're going to pick on the scan as the surface for the freeform topology to be placed onto. We're going to use step build, and holding control and shift at the same time, it allows us to draw out vertices a lot like the create tool that's in Polygon. So where we're going to start is, like I would do specifically for any way of making a car, is around one of the hubs of the wheel. Reason for this being is it kind of gives you a nice little starting point, makes some of the shape of the car more apparent, and it's kind of it's more obvious where the actual geometry should lie. So we're trying to find points on this step build where we can sort of strategically place polygons that might be later down the line, but we're actually more worried about the overall bodywork rather than sort of the actual detailing as such to begin with. Now there's some aspects of the model that you might want to change, or at least take into consideration, is where the doors may lie. Now obviously with the changing of the shape, it's quite difficult to know how you're going to cut those in a little while, but all we're doing is continuing down the hub of the wheel, or the arch of the wheel, and we're just going to have the geometry all the way down to the bottom on each side, so that we have a nice starting point. As you can see, if one part goes slightly wrong or inwards, we can edit that in order to help ourselves out. So we just click off of it into the subtool, and we can move it using the move tool, or should I say the sub-object modes, not subtool. For this process, going to be using or flicking between normal modelling methods such as the planar extrusion, and also going to use the move tool and the scale tool a lot, but we're using the freeform to help us because we already have the reference of the car. Now if you haven't got the reference of the car, then obviously you're going to have to use a form of blueprints. Now to continue with it, find a suitable place where you think that you are comfortable with going. Now I've just chose this little ridge that goes along the bumper to carry this shape onwards, because what I want to try and do is to connect this into the middle of the actual part of the car, so then that we can put the symmetry modifier on top, and we'll start to see some of the sort of car being formed straight away. We only have to make one half of the car, obviously, because the model will be symmetrical. So if we continue to keep doing that, if you struggle to zoom in using the scroller on your mouse. I often use the Control and Alt and the middle click of the mouse to help me out. So I'm just going to speed up the video just so you can continue to see the process of creating the car. Now this is actually the first time I've used this scan. Fortunately enough, we were given an actual piece of scanning data. Obviously usual modelling methods also apply. You can do little connects and cuts and bridges to save yourself having to do some of the work long-windedly through the freeform modelling tools. As you can see, we're starting to quickly able to create something. So we have the majority of the back bumper now. And with that, we're just going to use the Symmetry Modifier. Click the mirror gizmo and make sure that it lines up. Now it might not do in one of your scenes, so you'll have to adjust this as well as you can using the rotate tool so that we can get it to align. And make sure that you save oftenly. I would suggest using iterations, obviously for the sake of this video. I'm just going to quickly save. So continue to do the bits underneath, just trying to make sure all the body work or the actual parts of the car that would be the same colour or the actual car painted colour are done within this tutorial. Now it's good to sort of rotate and have a look at different views of the car all the way through the process so that you can make sure that the silhouette is as close to the original scan as possible. Now this process actually took around sort of 3.5 hours. Sometimes it's quicker, sometimes obviously slower, depending on how much experience you've got with freeform modelling, and also how much experience you've got with creating cars full stop. The bodywork part of the car is rather time consuming because you want to try and get your topology or the placement of your edges as fluid and continuous as possible when going around the car, so that when you come to the point of perhaps having different LODs or level of details in your model, or use any types of smoothing or adding topology, perhaps in the form of a turbo smooth or something like that, in order for you to be able to use as a basis for a normal map or an ambient occlusion map later on through baking. You want to make sure that this is as fluid as possible so that you can continuously edit the topology to work best for you. Now, once you've completed a certain area, it's a good idea to sort of carry on onto the next bit around it, rather than sort of going too far off, because it will give you a lot more of an idea of how the overall shape of the car is going to look. So I'm working my way up the back of the car at the moment, and just trying to get a basic amount of modelling and topology in there, but trying to remain with quads as much as possible so that we can have these edges flowing in both directions. Now you probably heard this before when talking about characters, the edge flow. It's keeping the edges flowing continuously all the way around the model and not really stopping at any point. Enables us to smooth the car when it comes down to adding smoothing groups, and also helps with lighting shaders within engines, and you don't really get any issues as such, at least not as much as if you have a model that doesn't continue to fly. So continue with the making of the majority of the back, just using the conform tool there. Now what that does within freeform modeling is it enables you to just push back the actual geometry onto the surface that you've got. So have a play around with that if you need to during your process. It's pretty much a cheating move tool. It allows you to push it back onto the surface. It's just not got the manual feel of moving the geometry like the actual move tool itself has, or the scale tool. Now, from time to time, it's a good idea to sort of take a little step back and have a look at what parts of the model look like in a certain way. Now we can see with the spoiler that we've got that little drop off, and it's just noticing where the actual window lies and stops on the part of the actual well, where it does on the car, and on the bodywork where the actual window stops and the bodywork starts. So it's good to flick through your reference images to be able to see what it looks like, and use really parts of the bodywork as landmark points so that you can see where different geometry needs to start. So we'll go back into freeform, and we're just going to start doing some more of the side panel of the car, leading it up to the roof and then to the front of the car a little bit later on. So I'm just going to speed up this video again, trying to get it as lining up to the actual scan as much as possible, taking the geometry all the way around to the front. But we do get to points where we no longer have a scan. Sometimes the data is not there, so we need to actually combat this. So what we're likely to have the most positive effect from is start using the edge extrusion tool with our snaps toggle turned on with vertex. When it gets to that, we can quickly make some of this geometry, and obviously without the data we can't use the conform tool, and we can't use the freeform modeling tools because we have gaps in our model that didn't have the data taken during the scan. So what we can do, as we can see, sort of like the symmetry helps us see the majority of the back of the car now. What we can start to do is to extrude further down the front, and what we'll try and do is to guess really where this is going to likely bend within the part of the door. So what I'm going to do first of all is just take it to the edge of the gap on the opposite side and move it into place, because obviously with us guessing we can only really use the basis of what we already have to help us out. Now I've just put a little flow connect in the middle of that. I use a set flow quite a lot in order to smooth out where our edges are. So if you were having issues with that, then you can add connect in, and they also enable you to they move them at the same time. Now what it actually does is it places the geometry exactly in the middle of the two surrounding edges each side of it, so that what you get really is a smoothing effect that happens, and you don't tend to get this effect quite as easy by manually moving something. So it's a nice little tool to play with. So we're going to carry on moving down to the front of the car and just finding parts. Now, if you get bored of a certain bit, or you feel like you are not quite finished, just take your time with it and make sure that you get the majority of the actual bodywork of the car sorted. If you don't feel like doing a certain part of it, you can always move on to another bit and continue it there. Sometimes it's quite nice to be able to just flick between different parts of the car and just take a step back, because then when you return to the other part of the car that you were going to have a go at, you see the issues with it a lot easier than what you would do previously. So just making sure that these go together in the middle, put in a couple of connects in, hopefully the similar amount of what we've got on the back of the car, because then it will allow us to get the same amount of edges flowing continuously around the car, and it enables us to have nice topology, nice flowing topology like we mentioned earlier on. And I'm just moving these into place so we can start to see that they're conforming to the actual shape of the scan that we've got. I like to flip between all of these processes in which I've mentioned, just to give myself a little bit of autonomy rather than relying on the automatic processes of the freeform modelling. Then I'll start to bridge a little bit, just to give myself a little bit of an idea of whether the edges do flow around the car. I'll show you this just so that we can see it. It's making sure that we do have them flowing. I'm just simply capping that space between them, connecting them, and making sure that my topology is right before I move on to other parts of it. So just making sure they're lined up, as I mentioned, and if I haven't got enough, then I'll add some more in to be able to keep them continuously flowing. So as you can see here, I'm just going to add more connects. So we've got 2 down the bottom, so we're going to add 2 more in there. Flick back into the vertice and connect there, just so that we can see that the topology is continuously flowing around the model. Once I'm happy with that, then I'll just probably delete that again, just so I know that there's exactly the same amount on the roof as what there is on the back of the car, and they continuously flow. And then I'm going to set flow these, just so we get a nice smoothed appearance of these edges, and they're evenly spread throughout the back of the car. So you're in no rush with this really, it's just taking your time, making sure everything lines up. If you have the data, use the data from the scan. If you don't, try and use your own intuition as much as possible as where it's likely to be, and every so often to check the rest of your mesh to make sure that you've not got any anomalies anywhere or anything that's looking a bit out of place, and then it gives you less to worry about as you go along. As I said, taking a little bit of a step back from an area in which you're working on and moving to another for a little while is quite a helpful process, or at least a helpful stopgap when modelling the car. So just checking some of the bodywork, see if I like the way in which it looks, and then I'm going to move on to doing some on the roof, continuing the rest of it. But I'm going to make sure that it's got the same amount of topology like with the back, the same on the side as well. So I'm going to use the snaps tool again rather than using the freeform modeling, because then I'm able to snap to each of these vertices, and it makes a large part of the model rather quick to make. And afterwards, what I'll do is make sure that they're all evenly spaced out with set flow, and I'll make sure that they're all welded together, as the snaps tool doesn't weld the points. You'll find it's quite difficult to use the snaps tool without the actual data off, because it's trying to snap to already existing vertices on the scan data instead. So I'm just going to weld them all together, selecting them all, and I'm going to start to bring in the central parts of the roof again as well. So a lot quicker process is the roof. It's a large area with not so many things really going on the majority of cars, apart from some that have the open sun roofs and things like that, or a convertible. They tend to be rather easy to go about, so we can just start smoothing them out once we've made them relatively quickly in comparison to the rest of the car. And then we can sort of take a look at a different view and make sure that it is continuously flowing, and use the set flow as much as possible to help us out. Now, this tool actually wasn't around before the graphite modelling tools were introduced to 3dsmax. Before then, we actually had to move every single vertice alone in order for us to be able to try and do as good of a job of this as possible. Using the scale tool was probably the closest thing that we had. Let's take a look around. Save again. So I'm going to start to speed up a little bit of this process, just so we can get a little bit further along as well. Back to my freeform that I did earlier, and just continuing with the part of the car in which is quite distinct as that little sharp edge that we have on the front of the front wing. I'm just taking that all the way down to the front. Really, it's just about taking your time with it and not rushing, not worrying too much about these little indents and like the subsidiary parts of the car, like the wing mirrors and the lights and the grates and things like that. They're things for later on. Don't tend to worry about those so much until you've actually finished the rest of the topology of the car. But the whole process of making the car does flick between the three sort of methods, to be honest. The manual extrusion of polys, the freeform modelling, and also the sort of the manual editing of the position of the geometry. So it does continue around the whole of the car in the same manner, trying to keep the same amount of polys flowing all the way around the model. If there's one thing to take from this video and watching me model the car, is that nice topology, or nice flowing topology, will help you out so much more than trying to edit it later on, because lighting will be an issue, smoothing will be an issue, texturing will be an issue. It's just not worth the time and effort later on. You might as well quad as much as possible and keep these edges flowing. Now, there's nothing against actually deleting different parts that you don't like as well and going back through them. I do this a little bit on the front wing of the car because of the change in the shape around the middle part of the bumper, or the upper part of the bumper that leads on to where the hood is. I go back there a couple of times, but like you say, with the front of the car, it's just exactly the same as the back. It's taking the extrusions to the middle of the car and just following the shape that we have from the scan. Now, at some point, you're going to have to put different parts of the car in to the bodywork. So, for instance, the badge on the back of the car. But I would leave most subsidiaries until you've finished the overall bodywork of the car, so it doesn't trip you up. Because then you have to collapse your stack so your symmetry disappears. There's lots of different things that you'll have to do, including the rotation and setting up the body of the car again, which is quite difficult, or at least time consuming. So we're actually going to use or create a cylinder. So we're going to Boolean a cylinder into this. We're going to go into the back view, and just so that we can see the size of the shape. With that, we're going to move it into place. And this is the exact same process for the front of the car, which you'll see in a short while as well. It's just an area to be able to cut out of it that you're going to create the subsidiary part of the car a little bit later on. So you can edit that without changing it to an editable poly. It makes it a lot easier for this little secondary object. But what we need to do, so when we're happy with it, is click on our car model. We're going to just get rid of our symmetry for now, and we're going to Boolean the shape. But I'll just show you first of all what it would do with Boolean. Now, a lot of people sort of use just normal Boolean. Now, the only thing with that is it actually adds in the triangulation onto your model, so you would actually have the dotted line connecting the verts within your model. Now, as you can see with this Boolean, we need to change it to subtract rather than adding onto it, so we just change the operation and it will go onto that. So you see now we convert to editable poly, we don't have any triangulation or any edges added, but if we were to put Boolean on instead, what we'd see is that we'd have triangles rather than quads being formed. Now, unfortunately, like I've said, having put a Boolean into this, we're going to now have to edit where our model of the car is again. So we've got to do all the rotation and the moving of the symmetry, which is quite troublesome. So it's a good idea to tend to leave any sort of form of compound modelling, such as the Boolean, until you be able to do it all at the same time. Now you'll see me do the Boolean twice in this video as more of a sort of a reiteration of the process, having already done it previously, but with this part of the video was done on a separate time or recording. And the process is just making sure that it looks exactly the same as what it does or did previously when it lined up. so that you get the best result, or matching to the scan as you can. Now what we want to do with these parts is just connect these little verts that have added up, so that we've not got any n-gons, so any multiple sided polygons, or more than 4-sided polygons on our model, because that's when we get, again, smoothing issues, texturing issues, shading issues. And then we move on to different parts of the car again, to be able to sort of continue with those. Now we can flick through our references, as I said before, and to be able to sort of carry on doing the body work and taking a look at what it is if you haven't got the data. And do exactly the same with the front of the car here. We're doing the Pro Boolean again, just so we can see where it's going to line up. Obviously this is the point where you should really be looking for blueprints of the car so you can get it mathematically correct, but I'm just doing this for the sake of the video, just to show you how to go about the whole process. And I'm just going to finish off this video by completing the top part of the spoiler rather quickly using a different part. We actually make the object look see-through, add them in, bridge the edges, and move them down into the different view instead, so that it lines up with the scan. There's another so the manual way of creating the model with the scan data in the background. And just taking a look lastly at how far the roof comes forward before the windscreen starts, and lining everything up, try and keep it flowing as well as possible. And we're going to go back to that trusty tool called set flow to try and even everything out and just move a few bits here or there as well as possible, to try and make as nice smooth shape as possible, and just keep it all lined up to the scan. So there we have it. After the Pro Boolean and add the symmetry back on, we have the bodywork of the Polo GTI Volkswagen. Make sure you save it and check out my next video when it's uploaded of the subsidiaries and the interior of the car. Thanks for watching.